My name is Coley Calabro, and I'm with Sarepta Therapeutics. We're thrilled to have you join us for this incredible conversation on the sibling perspective. As I know many of you on the call can understand, the sibling or Duchenne doesn't affect just the individual; it affects the entire family. And siblings in particular can bear a great deal of weight, but also have so much reward in this journey. And we're thrilled to have SareptaCircle Engager Katie, and also sibling to Joe, and Dr. Kendra Bjoraker share their personal and professional perspective on this very important topic with us. Before I get started, I want to thank Katie and Kendra for being here to share your experience for the SareptaCircle program. They are being compensated by Sarepta for the program this evening. Also, as a reminder, this information that we'll be sharing this evening is provided by Sarepta for educational purposes and is not intended for medical advice. For medical or treatment-related questions, we ask that you please contact your healthcare professional and team. The program will not discuss information regarding specific products, clinical trials, or studies that are run by Sarepta. And again, for that specific information, we also direct you back to your healthcare team or to clinicaltrials.gov. So we'll be here tonight for a little over an hour. We encourage participation throughout. So please, as you have comments and questions, use that chat box that's in the bottom center of your screen, and we'll take those questions at the end of our discussion. Also, we ask that you do hold on at the end for the small group breakouts. Those are intended for caregivers and patients. We do hope that you stay for those because they're a great way to connect, share your personal experience, and benefit from hearing one another's perspective on the various topics that we're discussing tonight. So we do say feel free to take notes, but don't be concerned if you don't capture everything and write everything down. We will be following up with an email with many of the takeaways that are discussed throughout the conversation. So with that, I will hand this over to Kendra to help get our conversation started. So Kendra.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Sarepta. Hello, everyone, and good evening. My name is Dr. Kendra Bjoraker. I'm a pediatric neuropsychologist in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I've been here and working with people with Duchenne for over 2 decades, and I've served as faculty at the University of Minnesota and the Children's Hospital Colorado, where I was part of the neuromuscular team working with families and boys with Duchenne muscular dystrophy and other genetic conditions. So welcome, Katie.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Katie. I'm currently a full-time master's student studying for social work. I'm 26 years old. I went back to school here after working in community outreach for a few years. I'm also the oldest sibling in my family. I have 2 younger brothers, Sam, who is 23, and Joseph, who is 20. And Joe is my brother living with Duchenne. So really looking forward to chatting with all of you tonight and sharing our perspectives.
Thank you. You know, for siblings, living with a brother with Duchenne adds more significant and unique experience to that relationship. Throughout numerous accounts of parents and siblings of children with a diagnosis or disability, it really becomes very clear that when a child and family is diagnosed with Duchenne, it really does affect the entire family. Also, that it's also clear that each family member can be either strengthened or stressed from the situation. And that degree of these conflicting effects seems to vary from family to family. They also vary from person to person, so it's really on a continuum. Some factors, however, can help strengthen families and really minimize those stressors. This discussion tonight is meant to guide you with important information and practical suggestions for helping and supporting siblings. So let's get started. At diagnosis, siblings will pick up on everything that goes on in the house. Just like you as parents and caregivers, they are trying to process the information as well. However, the first step that I would like to say to families and caregivers is really process that diagnosis as much as you can, take in all the information that you can, get answers to some of the questions. I know that you can't for every question, before you communicate those with your children or other family members. Once you get that information, then you can share. So with that, Katie, do you remember when you first learned that your brother Joe had a diagnosis with Duchenne?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as the oldest child, I think I knew that something was going on with Joe. He walked a little bit differently. He wasn't keeping up with his friends and other kids at school. And I knew, my mom had told me that they were taking him to the doctor. And, I remember her kind of giving a reason, like he can't run, or he runs differently than other people. So I was 12 at the time and just was diagnosed at the age of 5. So I don't remember the exact conversation since it's been, 15 years, but I remember having a series of conversations with my parents, and, feeling really sad and scared and a lot of uncertainty. I remember my parents talking to my grandparents, and we were kind of sent out of the room and kind of knowing something was wrong. So I think what was helpful though is that they told us right away. They, let us know that they were there for us, kept open lines of communication. I had done some Googling because that was natural, I think, for me to want to explore more, because they hadn't shared everything, which can be really scary. So I think they were good about just letting me know, hey, if you see something or have questions, to come to them. So we just kind of started at diagnosis an open line of communication.
That sounds, good, because you remember vividly that your parents were stressed. You said a vivid memory of them being stressed, and you knew something was going on. And that's really true, that you knew something was amiss. You just didn't know what it was. We also know psychologically that kids between 5 and 10, they really eavesdrop on conversations. They're like sponges. They see everything and they hear everything. That is what happens developmentally with children. They really see and they hear everything, and they have really powerful imaginations. Anxiety is the most frequent result of the lack of information. So without information about a sibling's diagnosis, younger children can worry that they're going to catch it or that they caused it. Like I said, their imagination goes wild. The young child will not only be able to, they can't understand. What they understand, just like Katie said, is some of those traits, those physical traits, like you knew that he couldn't run or do certain things motor wise, but you really didn't have words to put with anything else. So that brings us to our first topic tonight, which is to establish open and honest communication and education, just like Katie said. Siblings need developmentally appropriate and ability appropriate information about their siblings' diagnosis of Duchenne. There's some good resources that you can use, such as videos that are online, even children's books, but don't worry about it. We're going to share some of those in an email after this program. But it's just important to know that a child will have lots of questions. They may seem really isolated and really quiet. So it's upon you as parents to kind of give them that information. That's a good thing. It's a great gift for siblings to have parents who recognize that there's questions, because that will allow a child to grow emotionally and psychologically into healthy adults. They must have adequate opportunity just to, open the door and ask a question, process their feelings, share their ideas, share their perspectives on what is happening that is rooted in safety and support from you as parents and caregivers. Don't worry about it, because children typically will lead into what those questions will be. So just set up the environment so they know that no question is a bad question. After answering the questions, really rephrase it, because sometimes children hear something differently. So can you tell me what you just heard? And that will kind of open up the conversation so that you make sure that you understand, reassure them that they can continue to ask any question that comes to their mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of going off of that, you won't be able to tell your child everything at once. I think that's kind of why I Googled things, because my parents weren't going to overwhelm me with all this information, when they were at the initial stages of telling me. So, they definitely have tried to answer my questions as they came. And, the conversations have evolved. And now as an adult, these conversations are still happening, and they're a little bit more open and honest. But obviously there's age appropriate ways to share things. I have another younger brother, Sam, who is 3 years younger than me, and they explained a lot of things together with both of us. But I think there is that age gap, so some of the conversations differed, and our personalities are different, and I might come to my parents more with things where they might have to check on him a little. And I think it's important, even if he wasn't asking a lot of questions, for him to know that my parents were there for him if he had them. And we really just, everyone processes this information in different ways. We're all unique. And I think figuring out what works for you and your family is important. We all process this differently. So I think, what was important was just knowing we could go to my parents. And Duchenne was one aspect of our life. Obviously there was other things going on as well. So we were just really encouraged to ask questions, and the disease evolves. So just being open about the change when questions come up.
Absolutely. And what you mentioned was Sam, didn't really say a whole lot. He didn't, open up as much, but that's typical in teenage boys. They'd rather have, something else happening to them than have to ask a question about other things. So boys don't really communicate the same. It's changing a little bit, but absolutely, every family varies, and just to be open and honest with them is the message we're trying to send tonight.
Yeah.
We also need to find healthy, appropriate ways to get children involved in childcare. So it's really important to do that. Like I said, ask questions and be open and honest, and find appropriate ways to communicate. And what you said was just really important, Katie. So the impact of having a child with Duchenne in the family varies considerably, just like Katie said. This is researched, yet there are some common threads that run through sibling stories. For many, the experience or journey is positive and enriching for many. So I want to say that right out there. They have learned how to be involved, but not caregiver of their brother. They have learned to be more compassionate and understanding. They can see other people with disabilities, so they really understand chronic conditions in a more positive experience. Many really, like you, Katie, go on to be in the healthcare profession and like social work as well. But those who are benefited and grown from this experience have also shared that they have an healthy involvement as well with the family. Can you tell me just a little bit about how you helped out, and what kind of things did you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in my experience, I never felt like I had to do certain things in terms of Joseph's care, or it was part of, it was a chore. But more of just deciding to help out and see things that he needed. And I think that's kind of what you spoke to about, kind of, you just have this awareness and empathy sometimes when you have a sibling or someone close to you with a disease like this. So I think it was just, I was happy to help Joseph in these situations. It's even like when he was still walking, picking him up and helping get him down the stairs, or just like helping him grab a coat or reach something that he couldn't do himself. So I think it doesn't even have to be a real formal process or task. It can really just be a willingness to help out. And I think, my parents modeled that. And I think like kids learn obviously through their parents modeling things often. So I think just helping out where I could, even if it's just as simple as helping him open the door, was kind of how I approached it.
And your parents did model it, but you also have a temperament and a natural helping personality as well. And I think most children do. When they see somebody needs something, they will tend to help out, but that was set for you. It's important that guidelines are, set like in your family, what works for your family, your specific family, asking if they need help with smaller tasks or backpack or getting supplies ready or something like that. It's really important for caregivers, parents to have routines and some guidelines, help family members know what they should do and which order they should do it, really make them feel safe and secure. Those routines, when you put up those bumper guards, that really does help, which I call guidelines, that helps make the home. I know that it's hard, but sometimes make it as predictable as you possibly can. So that helps, especially when things are stressful. They know that they have a routine, that they have a guideline. So scheduling bedtime, mealtime, quiet time, we're going to have active time, but put down your electronic time, stuff like that. They also benefit younger children. That's what we're talking about tonight, the younger children and school-aged children. They will benefit from having a routine nap time, nighttime, bath time, everything. They thrive on that. And once they have that routine, then they kind of deviate from that. So the next focus is how to make time to connect and celebrate siblings. First, make time for all family activities, like Katie said. Make it fun. Don't always talk about Duchenne. If you have trouble identifying activities to focus on, really just expand the ones that you're already doing. Katie, your family participate in activities together, like you have said. Can you share some of those activities?
Yeah, so I think, from the get-go, my family, I think obviously Duchenne's always there, but it didn't stop us from doing the things that we'd always done or we wanted to do as a family. We may just have had to adapt a little bit. And obviously this varies, from family to family, but we've traveled with Joseph, even as he's 20 now, and from the age of 5 in the early years till now, we've traveled with him, and we just have to plan a little more and advocate for ourselves. And if there's something he wants to do, we find a way to do it. So we take walks. In 2020, we took a lot of walks during COVID, and there's lots of handicap accessible trails you can put away. If your child is younger, put them in a wagon and take a walk on. So I think it's just like, you might have to shift a little bit and adjust, but you don't have to write off everything that you've imagined for your life, for your kids. We definitely have had a lot of fun and continue to. And there's so many people who are willing to help when we're traveling, or just even just out at a restaurant. People want to help. So I think just continuing to do things as a family that you normally do and have a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think the key word is fun. And, something that you'd mentioned is kind of adjust and readjust, make it happen for the family within the realm of having a child with Duchenne, and involve all the siblings as well. A time to connect, but you also really stressed having fun, which I think is important, especially during stressful times. Another important thing to do is just to make one-on-one time with each sibling. It doesn't have to be a lot. Research says it can be like 10 minutes a day with each sibling. And I know I'm a parent as well, and a grandparent, that can be overwhelming, but maybe even little things. Hey, do you want to go to the store with me, or go to the playground with them, have a book, have a routine at night? By doing these things, you're helping your child see that their interests are also important, their feelings are important, and that they are important. Katie, do you remember if there are any activities that you participated in that made you happy and fulfilled?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, part of our childhood is that we all pursued kind of our own interests, and that we all showed interest in what the other was doing. And like you said, I think that can really be like the smallest things, like, how did that project go in school today? Or just showing interest. And, we all played different types of sports. I played soccer as a kid. I played the violin in school, like you said, like my mom and I would, just the two of us, go shopping, or even if she needed to run somewhere, just kind of showing that you still are worthy of obviously of their attention. Even though sometimes it might feel like there's a little bit of an imbalance. I think it was just like feeling valued from your parents and your family. And it can be really anything.
Yeah, it really can. It can be just 5 minutes, you're making a cup of hot tea and they help or something like that. That's nice. You said celebrated too. We have to celebrate every sibling's achievements, every sibling's gifts, and not scale down as to make hard feelings or guilt didn't factor into those daily activities. You can do this by encouraging your child to participate in activities that they love, like sports or camp. Really encourage them. The guilt comes when a child feels like they're not participating in something that they love. So that's where the siblings come in, and they have maybe some anger and guilt. But it's really important that they have outlets, they have their own social support groups. Siblings need opportunities to feel that they're not alone and that they're understood, and that they share some of these family dynamics and the same experiences. Siblings need to know that others are growing up in similar families. Opportunities to meet other siblings or read about them is very valuable. So what we're doing tonight is just so important for siblings to know that you're not alone. Some might benefit from like a sibling support group or a workshop where they can talk about their feelings, share about their feelings, do some, projects together that are meaningful to them. Katie, what was your support group like? Did you have support when you were younger?
Yeah, absolutely. I think support can look like so many different things. For me, I grew up in the Detroit suburb area. And I had a really great community, particularly in our school. My mom had gone to the same high school. I had family of teachers. So we had a lot of people who knew our family just from that and the community. So with multiple generations of teachers and just, all three of us kids being in the same school system, we really knew the community well. And I think early on at diagnosis had a lot of support in that way. And I see that as such a privilege. Obviously, not everyone has that, and communities are different, but I think even if you can find a small tribe of people, whether or not someone who is experiencing Duchenne who will really just support you, I think that's really important. My mom started a nonprofit, which has been a big part of fostering community too. And I think as Joseph's disease has progressed, we became more involved with other families and know so many families now who are experiencing this. And I think now, just looking back from the time when Joseph was diagnosed, there are so many more outlets for support, and so many resources you can just Google, and places to connect. So I think it's really good to have both, to have a community that maybe isn't Duchenne related who can support you, but also I think it's nice to have those people who you don't necessarily have to explain yourself to. So for me, it's been a mix of both. As an adult now, I feel like Duchenne doesn't define my everyday. But just having good friends and relationships always helps too, I think, just to find your group.
Yeah, find your group, support, and connect. I mean, even research says that the number one for quality of life is to connect and to socialize and to have your group. So that's really important, Katie. We're moving into our fourth and final idea, which is to acknowledge your child's feelings and be prepared for their evolving needs. Everyone's going to process information differently. We all do. That's just how we're built. But it's important to be aware of some of the changes in behavior as they indicate that they could be having some challenges. Katie, I'm going to jump right back to you. Can you remember how you processed the diagnosis and how it impacted your thoughts, your feelings, and your behaviors?
Yeah, I think at first, like I said, I didn't know exactly what it meant. When you hear the word Duchenne, unless for some reason you know someone who has it, it's a rare disease, so you don't always know. There's a lot of uncertainty. but I think it was really scary, and there was a lot of sadness, and that I think is normal. And over the years, I've had to process a lot of heavy information, maybe earlier than some people, but it just depends. And I think my protective tendencies, caregiver tendencies, older child tendencies kind of came into play a little bit earlier. And I think when you're faced with something like this, you have to learn to deal with challenges early on. And I think everyone probably faces something devastating in their life, but when you're faced with a lot of heavy stuff at a young age, it can be a lot to process. And this is a progressive disease, and I'm still processing it and grieving in different ways. So I think it's figuring out how to cope in a healthy way and know that this is going to be with you for a long time, and figure out how to, like we talked about earlier, have fun in the process. But for me, it was a lot at first. And I think just acknowledging that to your child is important, because it can be overwhelming.
Yeah, overwhelming and moves. It's always a moving feeling. So you go from sad, you could go from having fun, but then you can go, back and forth. So it's really evolving depending on your age and your ability to cope as well. So it's really important, like Katie said, be a noticer. Notice the emotional and behavioral cues the child is giving. So she said she was sad and not always, developing coping mechanisms as well. And you have to understand that certain behaviors are the way that children, especially young children, process. And it's important that if a child exhibits a lack of knowledge, they're going to kind of have behavioral problems, or they will get very quiet as well. So it's important that we support them to successfully work through some of this stress and difficult times. Keeping expectations reasonable and validate how hard it seems is really important. So, at different ages, just like Katie said, it's still evolving, even as she's into adulthood, that toddlers show stress in physical ways. They might complain that they have a stomach ache or a headache. Stress of not coping in children 4 to 7 may be more, they revert back to some toileting accidents. They may begin to suck their thumb, which they'd given up before. They have trouble paying attention, so you think they're inattentive. They can have meltdowns where they kind of work through some of those meltdowns before they become clingy, or they battle you and have challenging eating. And then 7 to 10-year-old, they fear for their health. So that kind of comes out more about them thinking about, what about my health? They may become angry, irritable. They use words that describe they're not coping, like I'm worried, I'm confused. They have more negative self-talk, so they're kind of cutting themselves down. So just be a noticer. It's really important that you notice your children's behaviors, and when you do, open the line of communication with them, set the structure in place, routines, make sure that you have feedback for them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, from my perspective, someone who's been living it for this long, I would say from the get-go, it's really helpful to try not to push it all in. This Duchenne's not going to go away. So I think figuring out how to live with it and acknowledge it, though, like without repressing it, has been one of the biggest things that I've had to work on, and figure out how to process this information. So I think it's always going to impact your child. It's always impacted me. Even on a good day, it's, part of your life. And, think your life changes, but I think it's just really important to acknowledge that impact. And, I think this goes back to having a good support network, knowing you can ask for help and advocate for yourself. So a community of friends and family, who are chosen family or biological, is always really important. If you need going to therapy and talking it through, I think that is sometimes a helpful avenue if, your child expresses the need for that. So I think it just it's figuring out how to acknowledge and process that and be able to kind of live your life fully in the midst of it, which is a challenge. But I think just being open, kind of like we've said throughout, is a good start for all of that.
Thanks for sharing how to process and cope. I think we need to talk just a little bit about, how parents can help their children learn to cope and to process. It's really important that you have a name for their feeling. And so make it in a form. So when you see them having an emotion or having a feeling, make sure that it's an observation, not an accusation. And then put a name to that, help them build their emotional vocabulary, teach them to label what they might be feeling. That will help them learn how to better communicate with you and become really emotionally aware. So social emotional development is critical in children, critical in siblings who have a brother with Duchenne. And by having the words in that vocabulary, sometimes you will, circumvent some of those behavioral meltdowns where feelings are expressed in behavior rather than words. Siblings need time to work through their feelings with patience, with understanding, with guidance from their caregivers and a professional, just like Katie said, if appropriate. But your children better than anyone else. So listen and acknowledge what's being said. Use active listening, repeat back what they've said so that there's not a lack of communication or you didn't misunderstand them in any way. That will make them feel heard and understood and validated, both positive and negative, as normal and acceptable. And we're all human and we all express emotions in different ways, but we really do like to be validated. Sharing your positive and negative emotions are really important. Also, to manage stress, the American Psychological Association provides the following tips on sleeping well, how to get some movement or exercise, talk about it so that they can find, you find how they're perceiving the diagnosis and are coping, find solutions, make time for fun, like we've said, get outside, write about it, draw about it. Also, the American Psychological Association has really good exercises for mindfulness and relaxation techniques. So you're here today, and that says that you're already doing something, and I really appreciate it. As a parent and caregiver, you're balancing so much. I know that you are. I've seen it, and I understand some of the stress that you're going through. But learning about this is the first step. Katie, you said earlier that Duchenne has impacted your life in day-to-day in so many ways. Can you share how you see the impact that Duchenne has had on you now?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely continues to impact me as a sibling, and it continues to evolve. I think there's a certain acceptance after a while that, this is here and part of our life. But, how I feel now might be different than how I feel in a year or two. I think on a positive note, I think I definitely have just a different perspective on life. I think I recognize a lot of the disparities and inequities in the world, not just with like handicap compliance or ADA things, which I definitely do notice, but just like noticing how fortunate, certain people are and the disparities and health insurance and things like that. I just have, I think, a different eye for things. And, like you said, I'm back in school in a health, for social work. And I think, really wanting to help people has definitely been fed a little bit by Duchenne and its impact on my life. I also just think Joseph as a person is just such a positive, great guy. He's just the kind of person who sees the glass half full. He's super happy, not all the time, but he's just a really positive person, and doesn't like see a lot of things as barriers. He drives with hand controls, he travels, like I said, he's in college right now, like living on campus, and just has overcome a lot of barriers and just advocated for himself in a really admirable way. So I think just being able to bear witness to like his journey and how positive and awesome he's been through all of it has really been helpful too. And just seeing that perspective, I think, has impacted me in a really profound way as well.
Yeah, it's so nice because what you've done is you found your purpose as well, becoming a social worker and getting your master's degree in social work, which is just critical. So Katie, I want to thank you for your heartfelt experience, the way that you cope. You radiate hope. That's what you do. And that's really what we all need is hope, and know that everyone is here for you. So thank you. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Sarepta. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Kendra.
Thank you both. We just so appreciate you and everything that you shared in this conversation. There's so much to take away. And, I know this is the beginning of many sibling conversations that we'll have. So the good news is this isn't the only one. We do have a few questions that have come in. So we'd love to take a couple minutes to address some of those. I do have one question that I think is best for maybe for Kendra. I'll direct it to you.
Okay.
I have a question that says, how do I help my son who is an older brother who feels held back from doing activities?
Okay. So the brother feels that he is held back from any activity. So that really comes with open communication. It's paramount that teenagers and older brothers and things like that are able to go out and do what they need to do so that they can become independent, have a sense of autonomy, that they can develop, that they can, get the feedback from other people as well. This is the time where kids should be developing their own independence and have their own activities and talents, and encouraged by families and family members and friends to do the same. So really honoring each family member with rewards for their gifts and talents, but also it comes back to that setting reasonable responsibilities within the family. So if you're relying too much on somebody within the family, one of the siblings, to do things, we can't ask too much from them, or they become pretty bitter, or they become actually perfectionistic. So we don't want to do that. Just encourage, have some sort of a plan that they can go out and be with their friends and to be more independent. But really talking to your son or talking to your parents, this is for a brother, is very important. Keep connected with other people is very important. Manage expectations. Also, I need to say this, but comparing siblings with one another, we can't, it's really hard to do that. I know that, having a child with special issues as well, oftentimes I catch myself saying, poor Michael, he can't do this, which it really puts some guilt on the other siblings. So we have to really watch what we say as well, and then build up the self-worth, self-esteem, and really make sure that you develop self-efficacy, which is empowerment for yourself.
Thank you, Kendra. We have another question that I think I'm going to ask you, Katie.
Sure.
So this question is, how do I ask for more of my daughter's help around the house without making her feel put out, or maybe put upon, and my son feel that he isn't helpful? So it sounds like there's kind of, maybe I need your help, and maybe I don't want to offend you for maybe not being able to help, is where this is headed.
Yeah, I think that's a really tricky one. I think, obviously there are physical limitations to what, in my experience, like what Joseph could do around the house in terms of like contributing to chores and things. And I think that can be tricky because it's like, well, why isn't he helping? But then it doesn't make sense in your head. But there can still be difficulty with that. And I guess the best advice for me would be to make it fun if you can, or, kind of offer like kind of a camaraderie between you and the daughter, like, hey, like, let's do this together, we can get this done. And I also think, like, to avoid, obviously you don't want to put too much on your daughter. I think figuring out like creative ways to maybe relieve that stress off yourself without asking too much of her. How can we eliminate the need for both of you to be doing so much? And I think it obviously depends on your situation. But I think asking for help from other people too is okay. And so figuring out like who in your life can you ask for support, or who can you go to? But I think really just like forming almost that alliance with her and saying like, we are in this together, I know, and acknowledging that it can be frustrating that the brother maybe can't do as much. I think we talked about that, earlier, like the open communication. We've said that so many times, but I think telling her like, I know this is really frustrating that you have to, maybe take on more of the chores, where in a circumstance where, your brother didn't have Duchenne, you'd be splitting them evenly. And I think just like acknowledging that before you are like, hey, I need you to do X, Y, and Z, can just show that you have some understanding. And there's going to be situations that are just like not fair. And it stinks, but I think the acknowledgement is important.
Yeah, can I say something about that as well? I love
Sure.
what Katie said too. What I have seen in my profession is sometimes the responsibility isn't there. And then when there's a crisis, all of a sudden we're asking the siblings to do something. I think it's important, like Katie said, give them little things over a period of time so that they're not automatically just thrown into it. And then maybe giving choices between the siblings of, what would you like to do? These are the choices that you have. And then make sure that the child is old enough to really do that responsibility, because sometimes when you get the pushback, they don't have the ability to do what you're asking them to do as well. And then also for the caregivers, maybe to keep a log of what's going on and how much extra help you are asking your child to do. And maybe those times are during times when they have tests at school or they have an activity at school. But, sometimes parents don't know. We really don't know that there's an activity going on at school or something, and we're asking our child to do that. So just kind of keep a record of, an accurate idea of how much you are asking.
Really great ideas. Thank you both for that. I do have one more question, I think, Katie, also for you. So when Joe was diagnosed, you were in middle school. Do you remember, I know it was a little while ago, but do you remember how your friends or peers reacted, and like if they had questions, and kind of how you managed through that as a middle schooler? Because that's an awkward time.
Yeah, middle school is a rough time in general. It's funny, in school, I've been learning a lot about just like the phases of development, and our brains are not fully developed in middle school. So
Don't tell the middle schooler that.
Yeah, right. But you think they are. So I think I definitely had a good group of friends who were supportive, but I don't think they didn't really know exactly how to be super supportive. They definitely I think you definitely have empathy at that age and can empathize, and they knew I was sad. So even just I remember they would just cry with me, or just be supportive, but I don't necessarily think they knew what to say. So I think having people you can go to is great. And at an age like that where we're not quite mature enough to have know exactly what to do in that situation, I think it's just that they were there, and continuing to be, inviting me to things and treating me normally too, was helpful. But I think that kind of also speaks to the fact that kids, especially I think middle school and younger, still need adult guidance and support at that time, because we don't know how to navigate it. But yeah, my friends were definitely supportive. I also think an interesting aspect was I think they might have known a little bit more about Duchenne than I did, because I think there's a protective factor in what my parents were, you know, how they were telling me, like navigating that, because it's my brother. But I think their parents, when they heard, might have been telling them more, which, you know, I think is good and bad, because I think they knew how to like kind of love me and protect me. But I think also it's just an interesting dynamic. But I think I think kids are more in tune to other kids' emotions than we think. They just might not be like fully equipped with all the tools to help, but I think having anyone who you can turn to is beneficial.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. Well, I think that probably rounds out the number of questions that we are going to be able to take this evening. But I'm sure I speak for everyone that's joining us when we just express a sincere appreciation for you both for sharing your perspective. We thank you always for just the authenticity that you bring, the wisdom that you share, and just your desire to continue to help the community. So thank you so much for the conversation. I always say, we could sit here for hours, and the good news is that we'll have more opportunity to have further discussions. So thank you. I do recognize on the line that we're not able to address all questions. So if we can assist with further resources here, here are some that could be helpful to you. So just if you want to take a snapshot of this to refer to after this meeting, please do so, and hopefully we can address any additional questions that you may have.